Bring in Behnam Ben Taleblu. He's a senior fellow at the Foundation for the Defense of Democracies. Behnam, thanks very much for being with us. President Trump said that he would be willing to meet with Iran's President Rouhani. What do you make of the Trump administration's openness to carry out talks, and what do both sides have to gain from the meeting?
Well, thanks, Elaine. Great to be with you. Excellent question, because while the Trump administration has resurrected the previous set of penalties waived by the Obama administration under the nuclear deal, which it recently left, it's escalated the sanctions strategy and cited a lot of the macroeconomic indicators of contraction in Iran as a measure of its policy success. At the same time, however, President Trump has signaled an openness to meeting with Iran's President Rouhani. He's tweeted this multiple times. He's said it publicly multiple times. And my only real concern here is that while the sanctions are having an effect, and that the sanctions could ultimately drive Iran to the table, the high-level rhetoric from the administration might actually incentivize Iran to not just come to the table, but to try to one-up Washington at the table. Meaning, if Tehran realizes that Washington wants a deal for political reasons, more than Tehran needs a deal for economic reasons, they may be able to replicate the same negotiating success they had in 2015 with the JCPOA. And that, too, would be a bad deal by the president's standards.
Well, the president said in a press conference Monday that a possible meeting with Rouhani could happen in the next few weeks. How realistic is that?
And, you know, the French President Emmanuel Macron also mentioned this in a few weeks. What is happening in a few weeks, of course, where Macron, Trump, and Rouhani will be attending, and that's going to be the UNGA in New York. That's long been a historical venue where leaders have met formally and informally. I would still put the chances of a meeting as to quite low. Iran's supreme leader, Ali Khamenei, has still formally ruled out negotiations, but that doesn't mean there won't be anything informal, such as a phone call. Remember, in 2013, in September, there was a phone call between Hassan Rouhani and President Barack Obama. 2 months later, there was the interim nuclear deal. So it's a non-zero chance, but not a high chance.
Well, the president also says that the deal has, quote, got to be non-nuclear. How likely is it that Iran will agree to that?
Well, it's imperative that Washington stick to this talking point if it wants to meet its own credentials as to what is a bigger, broader, better deal. Remember, the Secretary Pompeo had these 12 points that he laid out last May. I think those 12 points accurately say why Iran is international pariah today. If Iran does get to the table on nuclear and missile and regional and military, then I think it would be a negotiating success for Washington. Right now, it's going to be a tough sell to Tehran, particularly the supreme leader, who remains wedded to saying no talks on ballistic missiles. And President Trump today in France said that there have to be no ballistic missiles in Iran.
Well, President Trump says he will not be compensating Iran for sanctions on its economy, but he did say that the U.S. and other countries are talking about establishing a line of credit. Can you give us a sense of how damaging the sanctions have been on Iran's economy?
Well, the sanctions that are, in fact, right now unilateral have done the same, if not more damage to Iran's economy than about 10 years of multilateral sanctions have done. So many were skeptical of this U.S. unilateral sanction strategy, which really began in earnest last summer when the U.S. left the nuclear deal, and when last November it stepped up those sanctions, and then, of course, last April and May when it revoked all of the oil waivers. So the U.S. has really been gunning for the Iranian macroeconomy by the measure of the rial's relative value to the dollar, by the GDP, by the indicators of inflation and, in fact, stagflation in Iran, as well as Iran's low oil export numbers. That is an economy under severe duress. And that ultimately is what is going to have to make Iran's strategy of patience, trying to wait out the Trump administration, costly and drive them to the negotiating table.
So France's President Emmanuel Macron says he believes a deal will be met if both sides agree to meet. What role will France play in whether the two nations strike a deal?
You know, this has been a very interesting G7 summit. France, as you know, has been the host, and Emmanuel Macron's personal, political, and even policy skills have been at the forefront of this. I think Emmanuel Macron wants to play the role of a mediator. Historically, there have been other mediators in the U.S.-Iran relationship. Oman has been one. That's one country that helped pave the way for the interim and final nuclear deals. We know that in April, Prime Minister Shinzo Abe was essentially was interested in serving as a mediator between the U.S. and Iran. I think Macron here has his own personal brand at stake, but he also wants to keep the JCPOA, which is that 2015 nuclear deal. He wants to keep that framework intact. And I think he's doing everything he can, including this surprise visit by Iran's Foreign Minister Zarif to the sidelines of the G7, to get that done.
All right, we'll continue to watch it. Behnam Ben Taleblu, thank you so much for sharing your perspective with us.
My pleasure. Thank you.